So how do we subtract when we don't have common denominators? Well, first we have to find a common denominator. So we factor the two denominators. I've factored the first one, and I have factored the second one by doing absolutely nothing. And we find the least common denominator. I've asked you to think about the least common denominator as the smallest collection of parts that can be placed over one of the denominators, and separately, once again, placed over the other denominator, and there's enough parts barely that it can cancel. These cancel, these cancel. So x plus 2 times x minus 2 is the least common denominator. So we factor this. And then we write down the least common denominator as a target denominator, something we're heading for, we're heading to. Here we multiply this by 1 to get this, because it's not changing, so we multiply the top by 1. It doesn't change. If the bottom doesn't change, the top doesn't change. Here we need to multiply by x minus 2 to get this, so here we need to multiply by x minus 2. Now we have a common denominator, so we use it. From here on out, it's like problems from the previous section, where I asked you to put in parentheses, so you have a 4x, and then in here you have a 3 times an x minus 2. These outer parentheses help you keep your work organized, and it can prevent careless mistakes sometimes. So what we have is a 4x minus, and distributing this through, we get 3x minus 6. And now we distribute the minus sign through, or we can bring this down here. Let me scroll up just a little since I can. So coming down here, instead of having 4x minus, let's have 4x plus, the opposite. Notice these two are opposites because they add up to 0. We're adding the opposite. And 4x plus negative 3x is x, and then we have plus 6. There are no like factors that cancel, and so we're done. We're going to factor the denominators so we can see what they're built out of. Here it looks like we have x plus 2 times x minus 1. Over here, x minus 3 times x minus 1. And of course we have a 6 and a 4. Now what is the least common denominator? Well, it's got to be able to cancel the x plus 2 and the x minus 1 right here. That's enough to cancel the x minus 1, but it needs an x minus 3 as well. So the least common denominator is the product of these three binomials. Now what do you multiply this skimpy denominator by to bulk it up into this big 3 binomial one? Well, it's got an x minus 1 and x plus 2. It's missing an x minus 3, so we need 6 times x minus 3. Notice if you want to check to see if you've done something that's correct, you could cancel those x minus 3s and end up back where you started. That's a good sign, but we don't want to go backwards. Here we seem to be missing an x plus 2, so let's put 4 times x plus 2. Now we have a common denominator, x plus 2 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. And in the numerator, in our first parentheses, we'll distribute. We get 6x minus 18. Plus, in our second parentheses, we distribute here, and we get 4x plus 8, and that equals, in the numerator, 10x's, and then minus 10 over x plus 2 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. I'm going to scroll up a little. So factoring the numerator, we have 10 times x minus 1 over x plus 2 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. These cancel and we're left with 10 on top and x plus 2 times x minus 3 in the denominator. And we're done.